Here I am at the start of the final moto at the Iowan Hard Enduro. I'm on the second row here. The first row left a minute before us and actually got off to a pretty good start for me. I was ahead of Nick going into the first corner, and I really enjoyed these 5-rider starts versus the mass starts that I've done in the past. You can see here Cooper goes wide, and I got inside of Max, which put me into second place on our row pretty quick, which is actually exactly where I wanted to be. I was right behind Ryder LeBlond here, who has been very fast and had some great results lately, so I was hoping to get behind him and try to learn from him. I had a great opportunity in the first moto as well. I was on the front row after somehow getting fifth in the hot lap, and after some problems at the start, I was running second behind Colton here and actually passed into the lead on this corner here. Colton missed that split off and went straight, so I dove into the lead and felt really out of place. It didn't last long at all, but I knew those guys were going to get around me anyway. It was just a kind of a bummer how it ended. I'll show you what happened, but it was a great experience for me just to have that pressure from them riding behind me. Never really had that feeling before, so it was a good experience to get that, even though it was short-lived. It ended right here. There was a ribbon across the trail. I don't think it was supposed to be there since it wasn't there for this race, and the trail was the same, but I got there and just stopped. Didn't know where to go, and those guys went around me real quick. It probably would have happened shortly after that anyway, or I would have just let them by. So I really wanted to stay with Ryder for a longer time in this one, and maybe catch on to that pace a little bit more, just because I haven't ridden that pace much or seen that pace much to know what the pace actually is. I just kind of ride usually, so it's hard to know how fast to go when you're not riding with someone. So this is some of the best experience I've had. Unfortunately, it doesn't last too long. You'll see a mistake coming up that lets Ryder get away pretty quick. But I was able to pick up on some little things. Like right here, you see him cut left and shorten the track up by going through the grass. I thought about it, but I'm just so used to going through the dirt path, taking the obvious line, that I stuck to the normal line that I took the other laps. And they're just so good at little things like that, finding those hot lines to shorten the track up, save time, save energy, and that's something I need to work on and get better at. It's just all about reading the trail and having that experience to know where to go. Early on here, the trail was very similar to the first moto and the hot lap. You can see the orange background arrows were for the hot lap, and that was kind of the main trail. Then there were some blue background arrows with pink spray paint over the top for the first moto. That was a little bit more difficult. And then the final moto had standard blue background, black arrows, and that was supposed to be the hardest lines. Now this line here ended up being a lot easier than I think I expected. That high line developed, and it was just kind of a cruise to the top. We were just working our way up and down this hillside, back and forth, turning at the bottom, turning at the top, and it was kind of a nice warm-up to each moto since it wasn't very fast or very difficult. You can see Ryder get hung up for a second here in this corner. That's because this was a last-second addition. I don't think anybody knew about it, but it was a fun little bonus line, I thought. Not very difficult, but a fun bounce up that gully and continue back to the main trail. Being so dry, a lot of the hills and rocks had great traction, which made for the course being a lot easier than I think they anticipated. I was a bit bummed on that. I really hoped that it was going to be a lot more difficult. Being a National Series event, I thought it would have to be at a certain level, and for the most part, it was on the easy side. There were a few hard sections, which we will get to, but overall, a lot of it was quite a bit easier than the year before. Some of the sections were the exact same, but since they had been ridden in, since it was dry, the rocks were more flattened out, it was just a lot easier to ride, and I don't think the top 5 guys had much of an issue with any of it. It's pretty easy for me to override this tight stuff, waste a lot of energy, and end up pumping up pretty quick. So as much as I wanted to stay with Ryder, I also didn't want to pump up early and have to recover this early into the race. So I tried to pace myself a little bit and find a pace that I could manage, but also try to keep them in my sights as long as I could. Now we're coming up on the next blue split for the final moto. Nice climb up this hill with a tricky little corner in there. There was a rock right in that corner that slowed you up a little bit, but as long as you kept some momentum, it actually climbed pretty well right up to the top. So I didn't have any issues with it. I did go a little bit wide there, came in a little hot here and kind of bounced off that drop as a little bonus. But then as I was coming down this hill, I looked to the left and noticed Colton coming up the hill, which gave me a little bit of motivation. It's like, oh man, the top group, front row, isn't all that far away. Knew I wasn't going to catch him, but just seeing a bit more dust gave me a little bit of a boost to try to catch Ryder or stay with him at least. And this is the next split off here that I saw Ryder kind of look like he was getting hung up here on the left, so I went for this right line over these 2 rocks, and it didn't work. First big mistake of the race. Stuck on this little rock that was not quite a bike length and trying to lift it up. Used a bunch of energy there. Killed a little bit of time, but the main thing was The wasted energy I was pumping up already from this went wide around that tree too, and that was the last I saw of anyone in the top 5. So while that may not have looked like a huge mistake, it is the start of going into recovery mode and having to get the heart rate back down, get yourself in check, and also now I don't have anyone to follow, so I'm trying to read the course rather than just following the rider ahead of me. You can see there I was already confused and took a little second to make sure I was going the right way, so now I'm having to look a little bit more ahead, which I'm not very good at, so if anything else this was good practice for me to look for the next blue split and just try to remember what I had walked and look forward to what's coming up on the trail rather than just following the guy in front of you. Now you're really having to make your own decisions. That's something that I really struggle with. When you are riding trials, you can inspect every section the minute before you ride it. You can find out where every rock is, see if anything's changed between laps. When you're racing, you have to react on the fly and make those split-second decisions that I'm just not used to. A ton of riders rode the main course the race before, so things could have changed, rocks could have moved, so that's just another thing that I need to improve on. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. There's a bit more mellow trail before we got out into the open to hold it wide open next to a field before we jump back down into the woods to the next blue split. I really wanted to zap straight over this log, but it actually moved a little bit, and then I saw this line to the left that everyone was taking. They opened it up for that foot plant line, and when it's that much easier versus pretty risky, you just got to take the easy line sometimes. And I actually saw 3 guys ahead of me coming up this creek, so again gave me a little bit of motivation. It's like, hey, they're not too far away, especially after that fast section. I feel like they just pull away so much in that stuff, but this creek was actually quite a bit more rideable than the year before also. It was more slick and the rocks were just more loose last year, so they've been beaten in and you could just kind of not cruise it. You still had to work for it, but I don't think any of the top guys got stuck. There was a big creek gap here if you went straight, but I wasn't going to do that. I stuck to the left each time and then blasted up this slab, which this part was pretty fun. Not super difficult, but nice slab to throw into the mix and get a little bit trialsy at least. Then it was back onto some more normal trail, so I'll skip ahead a bunch. There was actually quite a bit of trail like this that is pretty fast for the good riders, pretty slow for me. I know I need to get better at it. I just haven't put the time in on normal single track. It's actually not that easy to find somewhere local to practice that has good trails that you haven't ridden. Even practicing the same old ones, it's just not the same. So you get to these races and I feel like I lose so much time in the sections, and it's something I need to work on, but I haven't. So I get a little bummed when I see that there's so much of it in each one of these, but it's just part of the game, so I gotta figure out how to be a little quicker in them. I had a bit of a mistake going through this creek, washed the front end out there a little bit and had to hold on really tight to save it. And while it wasn't time consuming, those little mistakes really add up when your heart rate spikes, and you can only have so many of those before you really start to pump up, so I had to make sure to try to minimize those. This part here was pretty fun. I always hit the left line, nice little drop, and on the brakes for this corner. It was cool to see an inside line that was faster with a drop versus an outside line that's slower and safer with a turn. This part of the course was actually pretty fun, but when you are in a race and you feel like everyone else is just pulling you in these sections, you don't want to see too much of it on the course. So I just tried to keep a decent pace, not push it too much, and maintain what I could to not lose too much time. Then was back out into the open for some wide open pulls. I had a sketchy moment here, following somebody in the race before in the dust and about cross-rutted and almost went down, so definitely backed it down a bit on the final moto in those sections. Then it was back into the woods and down this little washout. This part was pretty fun for me because it kind of reminded me of a downhill mountain bike trail a little bit with little berms on the side. Now I'm coming up on what was the toughest hill climb, which I didn't realize it at the time. There was another line to the left that you could take and loop around, but I went for the straight shot each time. Made it with some dabs the first 2 laps, then I got hung up and had to push a little bit on the 3rd lap, and that's when I noticed some guys taking the lower line to the left. I'm like, what? I could have taken an easier line. Not that I would have went that way, but it's good to know all the options, and it's a good reminder that I need to walk the courses better. It might look like I'm going really slow here, but it was pretty steep and pretty loose, so I just didn't want to go down the hill too fast and miss the corner. Here's where the chest cam view goes from bad to worse. I hit it on the crossbar pad there, knocked the angle down. Fun little step down there. But anyway, when the chest cam is not ideal in the first place and you get the angle off, it's even worse. So it was a bit of a bummer to see that on the replay, so I'll be skipping quite a bit of this. Coming out of the woods here, there's a good amount of dust, which is a good indication that someone must not be too far ahead and a good motivator to try to catch them. There was some more fast trail out in the open here, and I definitely held back a little bit, knowing what was coming up, the hardest section of the race. I wanted to make sure I had enough arms in me to get through that, and definitely lost some time here, but hoped maybe I could close the gap in this section. But I was a little bit disappointed with how I rode it. The top 5 or so were going to the left and hitting the splatter line much quicker, but also much more risky. I looked at it, figured I probably could make it, but I just wasn't feeling like taking the risk. There were some big holes if you didn't make it, if you spun or got offline. I could just see a leg going in there, and I didn't want to take that risk. So I took this outside line, which was quite a bit longer, especially when you're waiting for somebody. I thought about going for the pass on that corner, but I thought it was kind of a lame move to go for, so I waited for him, and he got through it pretty quick, and I got through it after him. So not a huge deal. Still closed that gap a little bit since he had issues with that corner, but I was wishing I would have went left and hit the splatter and made the pass back there. But I also figured there might be an option here since there was a split to the left and the right. I saw he went right, the left was more difficult, and I thought maybe I could get by him if I nailed this section, but I didn't. I saw him right there make it before me, and a little bit of a bummer to take the harder line and not have it pay off, and then I go and get stuck in it, have to push out of it here, and really wasted a lot of energy here, so I had to take a minute and recover, regroup, let him get away again, but had to wait for my body to be ready to push again because I knew I was struggling. If I just kept going, it would have gotten worse. So took a second here to slow down, look ahead around this corner before I attack this next section. This part was a last-second addition, actually by Cody Webb. He was walking around and looking for some more good stuff to add to the race, and this is what he came up with. Nice little double-step splatter there, and there was an edge right where you landed. You had about a bike length to stop and pivot before continuing on. If you would have went straight off that and dropped the front end, you would have been going over the bars. So I enjoyed that little extra section he found and threw in. Again, right here, I started seeing some more dust, so I figured Will wasn't too far ahead, but I knew he was able to pull a bit of a gap as I made that mistake and had to recover, so I tried to minimize the mistakes in hopes that I would catch him by the end of the lap. This was one of the more fun blue sections up this creek. Had a bit of a gap in the middle you could jump across, and I never rode it all that clean. Kind of just bounced and dabbed my way through the top there, but never got hung up, so I guess that's good enough, right? Here is the next blue cutoff, and looking up the hill here, I saw Will stuck on the right side, which was the main line. It was a bit easier, but there were 2 tight trees that I'm guessing he bumped into and lost momentum. When I was walking it, I saw this line to the left, and it paid off because I was able to make the pass, but I stuck to the right line the next 2 laps. There were a couple more blue additions that were these steep off-camber hills, and they were pretty steep. Doesn't look like it on camera, obviously, but the bikes just tractored right up them. They were no problem, I think, especially once they got a groove in them. Really wasn't an issue, so it was almost a bit of a bummer that they rode easier than they looked. After a bit more normal trail in the woods, it was 6th gear wide open through this field, and this was my least favorite part of the weekend probably. It may look pretty smooth, but there were some harsh little bumps in it, and going as fast as you can while also trying not to hold on too tight was a combo I could not figure out. I actually had some pretty bad head shake a couple times on the hot lap and the first moto, so I backed it down a bit on the final moto and just tried to still recover as much as I could because we're coming up on the Enduro cross section right at the end of the lap. I wanted to make sure to get through that without any big issues. But after that, the race was pretty uneventful for me. I was able to maintain my position of 6th, and I was pretty happy with that for the final moto finish. A little surprised at the hot lap, a little bummed at the first moto, but I know what I need to work on. Need more speed, need more fitness if I want any chance at seeing the top 5 for more than a few minutes. But for now, hopefully you guys enjoyed this little commentary. It's my first time trying this, so maybe I'll do more, maybe not. Let me know what you think. Wow, that was a terrible ride through the Enduro cross section. I think I only rode it halfway decent on the final lap, maybe because I wasn't worried about saving energy anymore. But man, after watching this race and seeing all my mistakes, I want to try again. Can we go back